Croeso, this is James, aka JP Harker, coming to you with another video. This one's a video of the things I've been reading recently. Now, I haven't been able to read as much as I'd like to on account of small child and all of that. So it's just 2 books this time, and I've only got one of them to wave at you, and that's Queen's Gambit by Walter Tevis. The other one was an audiobook, and it's Conan the Barbarian, the Weird Tales omnibus. So for that I can just wave a sword around and you'll get what I mean. It's not a barbaric sword, it's a civilized European sword, but you get the idea. So, first up, Queen's Gambit. This was an odd one, because nearly everything I wrote down in my notes was negative. Cut the story fairly short. It's the 1960s, and our protagonist is a female chess prodigy. She grows up in an orphanage, has an addiction to sleeping tablets that sort of comes on and off. She learns to play chess from the caretaker, and becomes this chess prodigy. She's a master at, I think, 8 years old, and by 18 she's playing internationally in Russia, and she's a grandmaster and all of that. And to me, there were a couple of points to start us off that were wasted potential. The addiction issue is kind of flirted with a little bit, where she replaces her need for the pills with her need for alcohol. It's not really explored much though, so I thought that more could have been done with it. And the fact that she is the only female in most of these things, that could have been done more with. Yes, it's a struggle for her, but it's not a case of there's groups of men trying to exclude her from the tournaments. It's just that people don't take her that seriously. So it's not like she's got an easy ride of it. It's harder for her because she's a woman. But the struggle of it isn't really that big a deal, not as big a deal as you would be made to think. Now, I haven't seen the Netflix series. I don't know if they have decided to lean into that a bit more. But I didn't feel that much in this book. On top of that, the protagonist isn't particularly likable. She's not a full-on sociopath, but she doesn't really care about her stepmother. She doesn't really care about her stereotype black best friend. She doesn't really care about her friend/lover from later on. She doesn't really care about anyone. You've got the caretaker who taught her to play chess. She's kind of sad that she's separated from him, and you find out he's been following her career. And I say it made her unlikable. And so that makes it very hard to get behind. However, for all the bad things, for all the negatives that I've written down here, there's probably some others, I found it very engaging. My mark of a good book is if I find excuses to take a few minutes to just read a few pages and go back to whatever I was doing. And I did that with this book, and I honestly can't tell you why. Nothing leapt at me about the writing style, nothing was particularly engaging about the plot. I mean, it's a woman going to chess tournaments, it's not Rogue One, it's, you go to some tournaments, you win some of them, you lose some of them. But it was so engaging, I kept wanting to pick it up and go along with it. I mean, Da Vinci Code was like that, but at least that had a fairly fast plot. Da Vinci Code, I do not think is a good book, but I kept going back to it because it was engaging. And the same is true of this. So, I'm not sure how useful a review this has been, because on a surface level, you'd watch this and think, well, there's loads of this stuff that's rubbish about it. But I couldn't help but become invested. I couldn't help but keep wanting to go back and read it. So, yes, for whatever strange reason, I actually am recommending this. So, The Queen's Gambit by Walter Tevis. Have a go. It may surprise you. My other book, Conan the Barbarian. A while back I saw that classic 80s cheese that was Schwarzenegger's film. I'll keep hold of this, it makes me feel better. I saw that classic 80s cheese and I thought, this is weird, huge amounts of just silence, presumably because Arnold couldn't speak English well at the time. But I wonder what the books were like, because I'd heard that they were. And the one I read was the Complete Weird Tales Omnibus, published in 2017. Now, the Weird Tales was a periodic magazine that came out in the 1930s, and so I have to keep in mind these were not meant to be read as a single novel. You were meant to see them in chunks over a period of time. So the repetitive nature is, I suppose, forgivable. But I decided to give them a go, and I was not that surprised by the result, but I was a little disappointed. Weird Tales, I suspect, was written almost exclusively for teenage boys of the 1930s, and it really does show. Conan is the mightiest of mighty warriors of mightiness. He is quite the Mary Sue. He's the bestest pirate who ever there was. He's the bestest thief. He's the bestest warrior, the best military commander. The battle scenes are not written well, by the way. The combat is, the battles aren't. And as well as this sort of a reader fantasy that's been put in, we also have the reader fantasy of all the female characters. And I think I put in my Goodreads review that if you just have the word naked, supple, full lips, no civilized man could ever insert action, that's most of the wordage of this book and these stories. At least, and I'm not even kidding here, at least 5 or 6 times per story, something will be described as supple. Something will be described as naked. And not even always referring to naked people. It'll be like a naked sword or naked barren desert. And the subtext is rapidly becoming text. It is clearly written for people who are sexually frustrated. And yes, he's pandering to his audience, but he's got to sell his stories somehow, I suppose. But that, along with the hugely repetitive, formulaic nature of these stories, did make it quite a chore to get through. Conan has an ancient mystery, some ruins, he has a maiden to save, he has something that civilized men can't do that he does. That's about it. I mean, the world building is there, it is a complex world, but unfortunately most of that is delivered in a huge info dump at the start. Essentially Robert Howard saying, look, I'm clever, it's not high fantasy, it's alternate history, look how well these things tie in with actual cultural and racial groups. And yes, it's clever, and yes, it's well thought out, but it isn't interesting. And that bit was very dry, and the rest of it was, if anything, overly moist, to give it a phrase that would probably suit. You've also got to look at the casual racism that he likes to throw in. I can't say I support it, obviously, but it's the 1930s, and you can tell he's a contemporary of H.P. Lovecraft, though while Lovecraft was racist out of what seemed like genuine hatred, this guy seems racist out of ignorance. I'm fairly sure he'd never met a black man, certainly never spoken to one. So, while I can't approve, it's not shockingly wicked when the bad guys are black guys. I think I'd probably disapprove of it more if I hadn't read Lovecraft first, where the source of all evil is the mixing of races. That's Lovecraft for you. But, sorry, I went off on a tangent there. Long story short, Conan, it's sort of what you might expect, and it is a bit of pulpy fun. It is a bit of guilty pleasure, action, adventure, saving damsels in distress and all that. And I think if I'd read these once a month in a magazine, and certainly if I'd been a teenager, I would have been well into this. I would have loved this. Reading it as an adult, you see the flaws in it. And unfortunately that's kind of what I've been left with. So there we go. So I'm not recommending Conan. Right, I've rambled enough for a mere 2 books, so I'm going to round it off there. So yes, Queen's Gambit and Conan the Cimmerian Barbarian. Have a look. I'll recommend one, not necessarily the other. This has been James, aka JP Harker. Will Vowed.